This is the lesson for 7-4. What we're doing in 7-4 is that you're working backwards. Instead of being given the inequality equations and then having to graph it, you're given the graph and you need to come up with the equation. So there's a couple little things that we need to keep in mind when we're trying to come up with the equation. First of all, and this is probably one of the most important things, we want to look for easily identifiable points along the inequality, so along the line, where the line crosses the background grid. All right. That is super, super, super important. So you have your background grid. All right. We have our background grid. Let's pretend that this is part of our background grid. We are looking for where the line goes through points like this, all right? Because I can easily tell where that point is, all right? Like if I had a line going like this, all right, I can easily tell that this is a point on the line. I'll be able to tell what numbers that's at. As opposed to if we take this purple line, if we have a line, that was bad. If we have a line that goes like this, where it doesn't go through any of where the background grid crosses, I can't tell where, for example, this point is. All right. It's somewhere in between these numbers, but I don't know for sure where it's at. It might be a point 0.4, it might be a point 0.5, it might be a point 0.6. We don't know. So you're only looking for points where the line crosses that background grid, both of the background grid lines. All right. So the intersection of the line and the background grid. So when you go to write your inequality statement, we need it in this y equals mx plus b form. All right. So you're always, when you go to write your equations, you're always going to have y first. Then you're going to come up with your inequality symbol. Now, the way that you come up with your inequality symbol is we have to look at the graph. We have to tell what type of line is being used to connect the dots. Is it a dotted line or is it a solid line? If it's a dotted line, it's either going to be less than or greater than. If it's a solid line, it's going to be less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. Remember that if you see the picture of the solid line on your graph, you need to have an inequality sign with the or equal to with the solid line. Then we need to look if we are shading above or below to figure out if it's greater than or less than. So you need to look at your lines to figure out your inequality symbol. But the next thing that you're going to have is your inequality symbol. Then you have your slope. Now you're always going to have this x here, and our slope, our m, goes in front of it. Now remember, slope is always written as a fraction. The slope is going from point to point. How many you go up or down is the top number in our slope. And then the bottom number is how many you go over to the right. You always go over to the right. There are a couple of people on their graphs from yesterday that were going to the left instead of going over to the right. Remember, the top number is how many you go up or down. The bottom number is how many we go over to the right. So you're going to get things that maybe look like 1/2. That would really be up 1 over 2. Or maybe you get something like -1/2, or we're going down 1 over 2. And then your plus b is your y-intercept. Now remember, looking at your y-intercept, it's somewhere, if this was our x and our y-axis, your y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. All right, so somewhere along there, like if it crossed right here, for example, all right, this would be our y-intercept right here. It's where the line crosses the y-axis. It would be a positive number if it crossed right here, but if we had one down here, this would end up being a negative number. So you would end up having a plus sign for this one, but you'd end up having a minus sign like that one. So you might get something like +3, or you might get a -5, something like that. But this is your final answer today. you are coming up with the inequality equation. So let's take a look at this first one. So when you take a look at this, remember we need to come up with the equation. The first thing that I would write down or type in every time is the y, because you're always going to have a y. Now, the next thing that you need to do is come up with your less than, greater than, less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. When I take a look at this one, I notice that it is being shaded above the line. All right. It's being shaded up here. So that narrows down our choices to either greater than or greater than or equal to. Now, how do I tell the difference whether it's greater than or equal to? You need to take a look at the line. When I take a look at this line, I see a picture of a solid line. Therefore, it has to be greater than or equal to. Whenever you see the picture of the solid line, just like we have on our graph, you're going to have a solid line in your inequality. So right now we have y is greater than or equal to, and now we need something else. You're always going to have an x, all right? You're always going to have an x there. And now we need to come up with our slope, all right? The slope of our line. I actually like to come up with our y-intercept first, all right? You'll see why in a second. So looking at our y-axis right here, we want to know, where does the line cross the y-axis? The line crosses the y-axis right here. That is at -2. So I know that I'm going to have a -2 right there. Now, from that point, I would work over to the right, go along that line, and you're looking for where the line crosses that background grid. That line crosses the background grid right here, and the line crosses the background grid right here. Those are all points along the line. Now, could I have gone through and picked out these other points as well, where the line crosses the background grid? Sure, I could pick out those as well. We always look at these graphs like we're reading a sentence. You always want to go from the left to the right. Always go from the left to the right, just like we're reading a sentence. So now, how do we get from point to point to point to point? The way that I get from point to point is that if I start at my y-intercept, I'm going down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1. It has to be consistent. It always has to be the same throughout the course of the line. Since I'm going down 2 over 1, I'm going to put -2 over 1 in front of my x as my slope. This is your inequality equation. Now, could you have put a different answer there? Sure. If you don't want to put the -2 over 1, anytime that it's over 1, you could just get rid of that over 1 part and just put y is greater than -2x minus 2. So we could have either of those answers, and we did program into class kick to accept either answer. If this was a multiple choice question on your Regents exam, you probably wouldn't see this first one. They'd put the more simplified version of this second one. So let's take a look at this next problem. In this next problem, so the first thing that I'm going to do is put my y and I'm going to put my x, because those are a part of every inequality statement. I'm going to figure out my inequality symbol. So this time I can see that I have a dotted line and I'm shading below. Since I'm shading below the line, it has to be less than or equal to. I see the picture of the dotted line. Dotted line is less than. So that's my inequality symbol. And now my y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. The line crosses the y-axis right here at -2. So I'm going to have a -2 here. Now I need to figure out my slope. So as I move on to the right of my y-intercept, I can see the line crosses the background grid right there, right there, right there, right there, and so on and so forth. So going to the right, I can see that I'm going up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. So I could put 1 over 1 as my slope. This would be a perfectly acceptable answer. Now you might see it written like this as well. Y is less than 1x minus 2. Either of those answers would be perfectly fine. So those are for single inequalities, but you're also going to have systems of inequalities. You're going to go through that same process, but you have to do it twice. All right. So let's take a look. I'm going to highlight one of these lines. Let's take a look at this one first. It does not matter which line you pick first to do. All right. But you just got to do each one individually. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to put a Y and an X. And now I'm going to take a look at my yellow highlighted line here. I can see that I'm shading above the line and that it's solid. Shading above is going to be greater than or equal to. And since it's a solid line, you're going to see the or equal to. So now I want to look at my y-intercept. My y-intercept, where the line crosses the y-axis, is right here. That is at 0, 3. So I'm going to put a plus 3 after the x. Now, I want to see where the line crosses the background grid. I'm not going to put a point right here because I don't know where that is. That might be going from side to side here. It might be 0.4, it might be 0.5, it might be 0.6. I don't know. So I don't want to pick that. I only want to pick where the line crosses this background grid. Keep on going down it where the line crosses the background grid. So as I go from dot to dot, I'm going down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1. So negative 2 over 1. Looking at my dotted line now, looking at my dotted line, I'm going to have a y and I'm going to have an x. Looking at my dotted line, I'm shading above the line and it's dotted. Above the line and dotted is greater than. Now, where does the line cross the background grid? Dotted lines are a little bit harder to tell, but I can see that it crosses it right there, and right here. So sometimes you're going to have to figure that out. And how do you get from dot to dot, going from left to right, just like you read a sentence? I'm going up 1, 2, 3, 4 over 1. Up 1, 2, 3, 4 over 1. So up 4 over 1. Where does my line cross my y-axis? It crosses it right here. That is at 0, negative 3. So I'm going to put a minus 3 there. So that would be the system of equations. Again, I could write this one as just negative 2, and I could write this one just as 4. For the second one, let's take a look at our slanted line first, all right, before we get into hazy vixen here. Let's take a look at our slanted line. Now, with our slanted line, I can see that I'm shading above the line, so it's going to be greater than or equal to, and it's a solid line. So that's going to be greater than or equal to. Now, I want to take a look at where the line crosses the background grid. It crosses it right there, and then not until down here. Those are the only two places on this graph where this slanted line crosses the background grid. So how do I get from this dot to this dot? I'm going down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over 1. Down 5 over 1 would be negative 5 or negative 5 over 1. Where does the line cross the y-axis? It crosses it right here at 0, 3. So I'm going to have a plus 3. Now we get into hazy vixen, all right? This is a horizontal line. Remember, the H stands for horizontal. The H stands for horizontal. So I know that I'm going to have a y equation. So I'm going to put my y, but remember, we're not going to have an x because it's a horizontal line. Where is this horizontal line at? Well, this horizontal line is at negative 2. So I know I'm going to have a negative 2. And now, where am I shading? I'm shading above that line, and it's dotted. So above would be greater than. It's dotted, so there is no equal to. So that line is y is greater than -2. Now, there's not an x in any of my other examples, so let me talk about what an x equation would look like. Let's say that we had this purple line that I'm drawing right now, and let's say that we shaded above this purple line. This is just an extra example, all right? So let's say that we had this line. Because it's a vertical line, I'm going to have x, not y. It's at 3, all right? It's at 3, so I know I'm going to have a 3. It is a solid line that I drew, and we're shading above it because we want all the numbers that are bigger than it. That's how it's shaded. So a solid line and shading above would be greater than or equal to 3. This would be a vertical line. It's an x equation, where a horizontal line is a y equation. Questions on either of those two? All right. I would like you to just try this first one on your own, please. All right. Just try this one on your own, please. See if you can come up with the equations. I'm going to give you about 1 minute. See if you can come up with the equations of both of those. So let's take a look at this one. Let's take a look. Let me highlight this one. Let's do this one first. It doesn't matter which one you do first. So I have a y and I'm going to have an x. So when I take a look at this yellow highlighted one, I can see that I'm shading above the line and it's solid. Solid and above is going to be greater than or equal to. So where does it cross the y-axis? It crosses it right here at -3. So I know I'm going to have a -3. Where does the line cross the background grid? All these purple dots is where the line crosses the background grid. I'm going up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. You could have just put a 1 or 1 over 1. Let's take a look at the second equation. All right, this non-highlighted one. The line crosses the y-axis at -1, so I'm going to put a -1. And now be careful. We're looking for where the line crosses the background grid. Notice, remember, I'm going down and to the right. Down 1 over 1, down 1 over 1. So that's going to be -1 over 1. Whoops, I forgot to do my inequality symbols. I'm shading above that, and it's solid again. So greater than or equal to. Go ahead and try this last one, please. Go ahead and try this last one, please. So let's take a look at this yellow highlighted one first. I know I'm going to have a y and I know I'm going to have an x. I can see that this line is shaded below and it's a solid line. Below and solid is less than or equal to. Where does the line cross the y-axis? The line crosses the y-axis right here at 2. So I'm going to have a +2 at the end. Looking for where the line crosses the background grid, I'm looking at these dots. Down 1 over 2, down 1 over 2. So -1 over 2. Looking at the other one, I have y and I have my x. I can see that on this non-highlighted one, I'm shading above it, and it's a solid line. Above and solid is greater than or equal to. The line crosses the y-axis right here at 0, -3. So I have a -3. And now, how does this get to here? Well, when we go to the right, this one's a little bit confusing because when you go to the right, we don't cross that background grid anywhere. So I need to work backwards. All right, just looking at this, I can see that it crosses here and here. So again, you always want to go from left to right when you go to find your slope, left to right, just like you're reading a sentence. So I'm going from here to here. So I'm going down 1, 2, 3 over 1. Down 1, 2, 3 over 1. Down 3 over 1 would be -3 over 1. So again, be very, very careful, especially on the hazy vixen. If it's a horizontal line, it's going to start with a Y. If it's a vertical line, it's going to start with an X. And you only have the inequality sign, then a number on those.